everyone and welcome to an interview with Mr. Rajesh Talwar. This is your host Ananya Sharma. The book in discussion today is From the Lips of the Goddess Mata Vaishno Devi, which has an ebook presence as well under the title The Presence of the Sacred Feminine. So Rajesh, can you tell us a bit about the book first?
Hi Ananya, it's good to be with you and your team once again. And today we are discussing something very close to my heart. Jai Mata Di. This is the book on Vaishno Devi, From the Lips of the Goddess Mata Vaishno Devi. As you mentioned, it also has an e-version, Mother in the Presence of the Sacred Feminine. I want to discuss the book today, but in a general context, a wider context. We had 2 episodes of Insights in which I spoke about the 5 strengths of Hinduism and the 2 weaknesses of Hinduism. Now today I think I can speak about the book, this book, and I can also speak simultaneously about one of the strengths of Hinduism, which is the importance given to the sacred feminine. And I think this is something where other religions can learn from Hinduism. There are things which Hinduism can learn from other religions as well. So I'm not claiming a monopoly on wisdom as far as Hinduism is concerned. But without meaning any disrespect to any of the other religions, I do honestly, with all sincerity, believe that this is something the other major religions of the world, they can learn from Hinduism, which is respect for the sacred feminine.
So Rajesh, would you say that there is no reverence for the sacred feminine in Islam and Christianity?
Thanks Ananya. I think comparatively speaking, Hinduism has great respect for the sacred feminine. Neither Islam nor Christianity have the same kind of reverence which we have in our religion, and this is something they can learn from us. For example, the Muslim will say praise be to Allah, and the Christian will say praise be to the Lord. They don't have a female equivalent of the divine, because the divinity cannot only be masculine. But I was speaking to a Christian from Liberia, we got into a discussion, and she said, oh, God is a man. I said, well, in India, God can be a man, God can be a woman, God can be a river. It's one divinity, but it can have many manifestations. So for example, I believe that Christianity would be much more enriched if they could say also, praise be to the goddess, which was there in the pre-Christian religions. And Islam also would be greatly enriched if they could say not only praise be to Allah, but praise be to Allah.
So you just said praise be to the Allah. Who and what is the Allah?
Ananya, a lot of people are under the mistaken impression that Allah came into existence with Islam. Actually, that is not true. Allah was an Arabic word which existed for hundreds of years. It meant God, but it existed for hundreds of years, thousands of years before Islam came into being. But along with Allah, in the pre-Islamic Arabic religion, there was also Allah. Allah was the female equivalent. So you had Allah for the male God, and you had Allah for the female equivalent, that is the goddess. But now, because the feminine, the sacred feminine has been crushed under Islam, we don't have Allah. There is no option. In India, I can say Jai Ram Ji Ki, but I can also say Jai Mata Ji. In the Christian religion, there is no option. In Islam, there is no option. So sacredness seems to be only very masculine, as far as both these religions are concerned. In fact, there were lots of pre-Islamic goddesses in Saudi Arabia, in the Arab world. For example, you may not know this, but Shah Rukh Khan has called his flat Mannat. Now, Mannat in the common Indian language, we say that when we make a vow to a sacred site, or we ask for a favor, it derives from the Arabic meaning prayer. So, but Mannat was actually the name of a goddess in pre-Islamic Arabia. So there were many goddesses. Mannat was one of the very important goddesses. And people traveled for hundreds and hundreds of miles to pray at the feet of Mannat and ask for favors. So, but all these goddesses, they were, their worship was prohibited, their statues were destroyed, their temples were destroyed. And so the sacred feminine has been vigorously suppressed, not only by Islam, but also by Christianity.
So would you consider Islam and Christianity to be too masculine?
Yes, Ananya, there's no doubt about it. They're both very masculine religions. As I mentioned, the Christian from Liberia, the lady, she insisted God is a man. So God is a man in Christianity. Jesus is also a man. And so there is no space for a woman. God doesn't have a female companion. Jesus doesn't have a girlfriend. It's all very masculine centric. And if you see the leader of their religions, especially if you see the Catholic Church, the Pope has always been male. I believe, historically speaking, as a matter of just curiosity, once there was a female Pope, but that is because she was in disguise, she was pretending to be a man. So I think for 10-15 years in the Catholic Church you had a female Pope, but that was because she was pretending to be a man. But otherwise the Pope is always male. If you look at Iran, the Ayatollahs are all masculine. If you look at Islam, all the prophets are masculine. And they regard, of course, under Islam, they consider Jesus to also to be a prophet, and they consider Muhammad to be the last most important prophet. But Allah is definitely very masculine, as is God. And in Christian religion they talk about God, the Father, the Son and the Holy Ghost. So the Father is masculine, the Son is masculine. So it's an overly masculine religion, and actually if you think about it, the most beautiful sacred qualities are there with the woman. The woman has more compassion, the woman has more love, the woman is more caring. These are things which we can consider to be part of sacredness. The man is like a soldier, he is like going and fighting wars. So by excluding women, when I talk about the destruction of the sacred feminine in Arabia, I have to also speak of the destruction of the sacred feminine in Europe. Europe had hundreds of thousands of temples which were there, for the pre-Christian Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. So there were many temples in favor of, Juno, Venus, Aphrodite. The Greek goddesses were there, the Roman goddesses were there. Of course, the Roman gods and Greek gods were there also. Now, many of these temples, the goddess temples were destroyed and they were replaced by churches. So there were beautiful, places for people to go and pray. They were destroyed, and a church was built in that stead. If you look at the Wikipedia entry, Wikipedia has one entry which it talks about pre-Christian sites which were forcibly converted into Christianity, places where Christians could worship. They also have a similar entry about pre-Islamic sites which were forcibly converted into Islamic sites. So this has been happening all over the world, and I think one of the weaknesses of these two religions when compared to, for example, a religion like Hinduism, is that because Christianity and Islam were overly masculine, they were also overly aggressive. They didn't have the tolerance which the woman has, respect for other people's set of beliefs. It was very masculine. My way is the right way. You have to follow. You have to convert. If you see that Hinduism is the only global religion which is present today in the world, which is upholding the sacred feminine, the right to worship the sacred feminine. These kind of possibilities are not there in Islam. These kind of possibilities are not there in Christianity. There's an old saying, a political saying, that we say that corruption starts from the top. But if corruption starts from the top, patriarchy also starts from the top. And this is something which feminists should realize. So if your God itself can only be male, then obviously it's going to be a very patriarchal setup all the way down. And I don't think you have Christian feminists who come to India and they lecture people, which is fair enough. I think we have a lot of things to improve even with regard to treatment of women. But these Christian feminists will not ever question their own theology. They will not confront the destruction of the sacred feminine under Christianity. And that's very unfortunate because I think that's a very major flaw in their theology. The lack of respect for the sacred feminine, the destruction of the sacred feminine. In fact, people talk about how the pagan religions were destroyed. Leave aside the question of pagan religions. Consider how the sacred feminine was destroyed the world over. It was destroyed in the Americas. The American Indians, they had their goddesses. The Aborigines in Australia, they had their goddesses. All those goddesses, all those gods, they were destroyed. Their temples were destroyed in the Americas, in Australia, in Europe, across the world. Today we only have Hinduism which is standing up. So I think feminists, when they come to lecture, they should also question their own theology. We just have, female bishops in Christianity in the past 20, 30 years. Maybe 5, 6 female bishops. And this year we had the first female black bishop. So what's happening? If they, even to get a female bishop, they have to wage a war. They have to, have so much of campaigning for the rights of women to be important in the religious hierarchy. But the point is, no matter how many female bishops you have, if your God itself can be only masculine, then you are losing a very beautiful, a very meaningful part of the sacred, that is the sacred feminine. So I think there was a Greek dramatist who wrote a play called Lysistrata. Lysistrata had the theme that if women were in charge, there would be less wars in the world. And I think that's an important point which he puts across. It's an interesting argument. We have a lot of wars in the world right now. Everywhere there are people killing each other, whether it's Syria, whether it's Afghanistan. And all these wars, maybe they could be reduced if we gave more importance to the female, the sacred feminine. So, because as the playwright says, if women were in charge, there would be greater tolerance, greater compassion, greater kindness. So, it's a shame. And I think we will go on to talk about the other strengths of Hinduism and also the weaknesses of Hinduism. But I think this is something the world can learn from Hinduism. This is something which Hinduism has there to teach the world. Because, everywhere else in the world they have suppressed and destroyed the sacred feminine. The poor American Indians, not only was there genocide, but all their worship of the sacred feminine was also destroyed. Now people talk, they say, oh, poor Aborigines, Aboriginal rights, there are UN conferences, international conferences. But what about the Aboriginal culture? What about their religion, their practices? So I speak not only as a Hindu, as far as this book is concerned, I speak as somebody urging respect and reverence for the sacred feminine in cultures and religions across the world. Because I think this is so meaningful. How can you even talk of gender equality? For example, in the United Nations recently, the Secretary General, he did something very good. All the senior people, the Under Secretary Generals, he decided that there are going to be good female representation, so a lot of them are female. But this is as far as jobs are concerned. What about divinity? How can we have a masculine divinity and not a feminine divinity? So it's not, it's a very primitive idea that God can only be a man. I think this is something which Hinduism has to offer. It's one of our great strengths. It doesn't mean, of course, that everything is okay in terms of gender equality in India. For example, you stop people from women to go and worship in some temples. That's absurd. That is anti-Hindu. Or there are some temples which menstruating women are not allowed to enter. That is also absurd. It's terrible. In a country where we worship the sacred feminine, where we have goddesses, to have this kind of discrimination is just terrible. It's not in consonance with our belief system.
So Rajesh, why do you have two versions of the same book?
Ananya, that's a good question. My first book was, of course, From the Lips of the Goddess Mata Vaishno Devi. And then I realized that actually this message in Hinduism, the worship of the sacred feminine, this is something which should be spread to people living around the world. And so I thought that if I just speak of the sacred feminine, it will have more resonance. You know, Tagore wrote the Gitanjali, but he was very careful when he prepared the English version of the Gitanjali. There were very few references to Lord Krishna, hardly any. Why did he do that? Because he wanted to become more accessible to a Western audience, to a global audience. Because if he had said, you know, something like hymns in praise of Lord Krishna, immediately the Christians, the Muslims, they would have closed their minds, they would not have been receptive to the great wisdom in those verses. So, the Gitanjali is actually a collection of poems where a female devotee is addressing Lord Krishna. So this book of mine is a little different in the sense that they are both male and female devotees addressing the goddess. I wanted it to have a wider audience. I wanted the truth, the meaning and the power of some wonderful things in Hinduism to be transmitted to a global audience. And so I thought, let me have another version, an e-version, which speaks about this missing thing, you know, this missing part of spirituality in the major global religions of the world, namely Christianity and Islam. I should say that actually this is a trinity. Christianity, Islam and the Jewish religion, they form part of the three Judaic, you know, religions. All three of them are very male dominated, very macho. All of them have prophets, or one of them, of course, Jesus is the Son of God. So Jesus is the Son of God, but there is no Jessica. What happened to the daughter of God? And what happened to the goddess? So there's a God and there's a Son of God, but there is no daughter of God and there is no goddess. It's a gender imbalance. You can see it straight away. And I think this is something, a book like this, it can, you know, there is awareness going on. Which is why there is the demand in the Western world for having female bishops. Maybe tomorrow there will be a demand for a female pope also. But the progress is slow, but it's in the right direction. But actually, for the progress to be really meaningful, they have to accept that the divine can also be feminine. In fact, the divine is more likely to be feminine than masculine. Why? Because the feminine characteristics really have more divinity to them. Jesus, for example, it's because of his kindness, his compassion, his feminine virtues that we consider him to be such a great person, to be the Son of God. So without those aspects, these religions will be impoverished.
But Rajesh, Christianity and Islam are two of the biggest religions in the world. So surely there must be a greater truth to them.
Thanks, Ananya. Yes, Islam and Christianity have great truths to them. But the fact that they are the two dominant religions in the world doesn't mean they are the best. I mean, the two cold drinks which sell most in the world are Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola. But that doesn't mean that they are the best drinks in the world or even the most healthiest or even the tastiest. It's not that they have more truth to them. So, the reason why Islam and Christianity have been more successful is because they have carried out suppression of other indigenous religions without hesitation. They have crushed the sacred feminine. They have crushed pre-Christian religions. They have crushed pre-Islamic religions. They have not had the tolerance which would have been natural if they had had equivalent reverence for the sacred feminine. Because one of the other talks which we are going to talk about in the future is about why these religions have not been so tolerant. And I believe it has something to do with the overly masculine character which needs to be improved upon. So Islam and Christianity are great religions, but in this regard, there is something they can learn from Hinduism. Hinduism is the only global religion in the world today, because we are, you know, a billion people. So after Hinduism and after Christianity and Islam, we have Hinduism. Of course, there are more than 50 countries which are Muslim, and there are more than 50 countries which are Christian. And Hinduism is just there in India, in Nepal, to some extent in the Maldives. We are a minority, but we have claim to an ancient heritage, a very meaningful heritage, and there's much that we can give to the world, much that the world can learn from us, We shouldn't be ashamed of that. There are people in India who are ashamed of their own religion. But that is because we were slaves. We were conquered by others. So we lost confidence not only in our own culture but even in our own religion to some extent. But there is great beauty here. There is great truth here. And I think once people realize this, they will understand that there is more appreciation in Christianity. But still nobody will talk today about resurrecting those ancient temples which were destroyed in Europe. If you talked about that, people would say you're crazy. There's great talk about the rights of the Aboriginal people, but nobody will talk about let's restore their places of worship. Let's bring back their ancient temples. So I think the world needs to become a more tolerant place. We cannot, in fact, if you look at in some ways, this overly masculine religion, it has affected the cultures of many countries in a negative way. For example, Iran. Iran just has these ayatollahs. It's also a very, hidebound kind of society. There's a lot of discrimination in Islam against women. And part of it comes because the religion is overly masculine. If the God himself can only be man, only be male, then of course the woman will have a lower status in all respects. And so I hope we've had a meaningful talk today, and this is one talk of the 7 things which I mentioned, 5 strengths and 2 weaknesses of Hinduism. So we'll continue this discussion. Thanks very much.
So you don't think that Islam and Christianity have a higher truth?
Ananya, I think Islam and Christianity have high truths. They do have high truths, but in this regard, the truth in Hinduism is much higher. Because if you look at the exclusion of the sacred feminine, you will have to say that both Islam and Christianity are only a half-truth, because they have ignored half of humanity. India today is the only country in the world where 1 billion people believe in the sacred feminine. The rest of the planet, as far as the Christians and Muslims are concerned, they don't really believe in the sacred feminine. I mean, there are fringe groups who might speak of it, but not otherwise. T.S. Eliot, he famously wrote that in a world that moves progressively backwards, so our world is not necessarily moving forward. I have worked, as you know, in Afghanistan. I've seen photographs of Afghanistan, of Kabul in the 40s and 50s. And you have young girls moving around freely. They are dressed modestly, but today Kabul is very different. Kabul has regressed. If you see Iran in its glory at the time of Zoroastrianism, you could say that it was actually a freer country, a freer territory. Now, with this patriarchal, overly masculine, dominated Ayatollah world, it's suppressing the feminine energy, the female divine. So in some ways these religions have gone backwards. In Saudi, the woman could not be allowed to drive a car till recently. Their witness testimony, 2 or 3 women have to come to the court and their testimony will be given equal importance with that of a man. So a lot of this discrimination is there because actually the patriarchy is embedded and institutionalized in the religion. In the West there has been improvement because there has been decline in Christianity itself. Modern Christians, they realize somewhere that actually this is all too primitive. How can we have the exclusion of 50% of the world's population? So as Christianity has weakened, the ideas of feminism have improved. But personally, I'm not a great admirer of feminists because I think a lot of feminists in the West, they have just become overly aggressive. They have started imitating men. And the beauty of women is not in imitating men. The beauty of the sacred feminine is because of the beautiful qualities of compassion, love, care, nurturing. In these countries, you don't have an option. So I know of many women who live in oppressed families, male-dominated families. They go outside, they don't have an option to pay pray to a goddess. Many of them would pray to a goddess, I believe. In India, you have the option. In Hinduism, you have the option. But there, it's patriarchy all the way. At home, it's patriarchy. In the temple, is the mullah. The god also is a masculine person. And so for me, this is primitive, relatively speaking. And as T.S. Eliot said, in an age which moves progressively backwards. So, this is a great truth in India, the sacred feminine, which is something we should be proud of, and it's something the rest of the world's religions can learn from.
So Rajesh, can you tell us a bit more about the patriarchy in Christianity now?
Hi Ananya. Well, of course, Christianity and Islam are part of the same Judaic tradition. The Jewish religion, Christianity and Islam, they are all linked up together. As far as Christianity is concerned, of course, the God is male, and then he has a son of God, Jesus. So he's not a mere prophet. They want to get one up on the others as far as, say, Islam is concerned, because Islam, it's the Prophet Muhammad. But for the Christians, it's not a mere prophet, it's the son. And it's the only son. So a question arises, of course, what happened, firstly, to Jessica? Why did God not have a daughter? Why did God not have a goddess sitting next to him? So that's an important question. But even more important question, if Jesus is the Son of the God, what about us? What about the rest of the people? Are we not children of God? Is Jesus somehow on an elevated plane, that he is the Son of God, but we are not children of God? I was speaking to a Christian about this, and I said, what are we? Are we illegitimate? Are we not children of God? And he said, oh, well, the thing is that we are children of Adam and Eve. So I said, but Adam and Eve, were they not created by God? Were they not children of God? So are we not in that sense children of Adam and Eve and therefore children of God? So why this exclusive status for Jesus that he is the Son of God? So it's very strange. So, but if you see, the patriarchy is embedded in it very strongly. God is a man, his only son is Jesus, he is also a man, and God doesn't have any female presences around him. Jesus also, with a very small supporting role of maybe Mary Magdalene, and of course his mother is there, but he doesn't really have an important cast of female characters. All his followers are his disciples, they're all men. How can you have a religion where the God is masculine, the Son is masculine, and all the disciples are also men? So then you're sort of guaranteeing a patriarchal system within that religion. And I think in that sense, all three Judaic religions, the Jewish religion which had the Prophet Moses, Christianity and Islam, from my perspective, as the perspective of a Hindu, while respecting those great religions, I say this is a fundamental flaw in their theology. The neglect of the sacred feminine, the destruction in the past of the sacred feminine, the suppression of the sacred feminine, when actually the sacred feminine in many ways is more beautiful, more inspiring, more meaningful, more deserving of reverence. If you talk of the masculine, sacred masculine, it doesn't even sound good. The sacred masculine, what does it even mean? But the sacred feminine, it immediately falls into place.
So that was it for today. Thank you, Rajesh, for being with us and telling us so much about things that we didn't know.
Thanks, Ananya. It's been wonderful to be with you and your team once again to have this conversation for a book which is really very close to my heart. And I hope that this will be meaningful both not only for Hindus but for people from other religions. I hope my talk will be taken in the right spirit. As I said in the beginning, I don't mean to criticize other religions, but this is clearly a great weakness in the two most important global religions which they need to address. Of course, Christianity has, Saint Anne's, they have some saints who are female, but having a saint is low down in the hierarchy. Having a saint, a female saint or Mother Teresa, that's different. The main thing is the fount of all power, the God. If If that is only going to be masculine, then you can't really, your religion for me in some respects it becomes very primitive.
Thank you for being with us. This is your host Ananya Sharma signing off.